Chapter 20, Section 3. So the U.S. has kicked Spain out of Cuba and Puerto Rico. What now? Well, military governments are going to be set up by the U.S. in Puerto Rico and Cuba. We had investments there, order had to be restored, and so we're going to set up military governments there. Let's start our story in Cuba. The guy that we're going to send down to Cuba to be heading our government in Cuba is going to be General Leonard Wood. He becomes governor of Cuba in 1899, and he's going to do a lot of good things for Cuba. For example, he has schools built in Cuba. He has sanitation systems built in Cuba. Let's talk about that one for a second. In Cuba, there was an issue with something called yellow fever. And a Cuban doctor by the name of Carlos Finlay is going to theorize that mosquitoes were spreading yellow fever. And so two U.S. Army doctors, Walter Reed and William C. Gorgas, are going to begin to reduce the mosquito population in Cuba. The prime way you do that is you drain the pools of standing water. That's where mosquitoes reproduce. As they create a sanitation system, yellow fever is all but eliminated in Cuba. So, under General Leonard Wood, you got building the schools, you got the sanitation system we just talked about. He's going to help them draft a new constitution. And as part of this, we basically tell Cuba, all right, here's the deal. We'll pull our troops out of Cuba if you make the Platt Amendment part of your Constitution. The Platt Amendment is going to limit Cuba's right to make treaties. Basically, you got to ask us. You're 90 miles from us. We want to know what's going on. It's going to allow us to intervene in Cuba whenever we deem necessary. And they need to sell us land for a naval and refueling station on the island of Cuba, which we still own today, Guantanamo Bay. Basically, what the Platt Amendment is going to do is going to make Cuba a U.S. protectorate. The idea is, we promise to protect you, Cuba, but we have the right to intervene. Cuba is going to reluctantly accept this Platt Amendment in 1902. It seems like we've completely violated something we agreed on before this war. There was something called the Teller Amendment, that we're going to leave control and the government of the island to Cuba. And we've completely forgotten that at this point. In 1903, a trade agreement is going to be signed between the United States and Cuba. Cuban sugar and minerals will be sent to the United States, and then the industrial products that we're producing will be sent to Cuba. This is a trade agreement that results in a lot of money. If you look in 1899, the amount of trade between us and Cuba was $27 million. If you look what it is in 1917, it's $300 million. It is not until 1934 that we are going to give up our right to interfere in Cuban affairs. Let's talk Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is going to be a little bit different in the fact that Puerto Rico is going to be ruled like a territory. In the 1900s, the United States passes the Foraker Act, which says we get to appoint their governor and their upper house. The Puerto Ricans get to elect their lower house. Gee, this sounds a lot like the Philippines. And then in 1917, you got the Jones Act, which is going to make Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens. That one did not happen in the Philippines. That was part of the deal. They couldn't be. And it gives Puerto Ricans the right to elect both of their legislatures. In 1952, Puerto Rico becomes a self-governing commonwealth of the United States, which we still have them today. Here we are. The U.S. now has possessions in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. To get from one possession to the next, though, you have to go all the way around South America. That can take weeks, cost tons of fuel and pay and time. And people start saying, what if we could have a canal, a shortcut? We aren't going to be the first to try this. In the 1880s, the French are going to try it. They are going to try to build a canal across the 50-mile wide Isthmus of Panama, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps. Ferdinand de Lesseps was known for having built the Suez Canal, so you didn't have to go all the way around Africa. Since the French are like, hey, you've built this canal over here, how about you build a canal over here? You have experience in this. Well, building a canal in Panama is going to be nothing like building a canal in the deserts of the Suez. The French eventually quit. Abandoning the project less than 10 years after they began, after spending more than $280 million and having cost 20,000 lives. Since the French can't get the canal built, we need the canal. We are going to have to take over this project. John Hay, Secretary of State, is going to negotiate with Colombia about Panama. At this time, Colombia owned Panama. And John Hay and some representatives from Colombia in 1903 are going to draft a treaty where the United States would get a 99-year lease on a 6-mile wide strip of land. We will pay $10 million up front and $250,000 a year in rent. The representatives from Colombia go back to Colombia with this deal. Colombia's government was in a mess, though. They had just gone through a civil war, the leaders didn't have full control, and the Senate in Colombia wants to hold out for more money. They refused to ratify the treaty. Our president at this time is Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt is furious, calls this blackmail, vows Colombia won't be allowed to bar one of the future highways of civilization. So things are about to change in Panama. The Panamanian leaders would like the canal built. It's going to bring a lot of business, traffic, stuff like that to Panama. And so the Panamanian leaders begin to plot to overthrow the Colombian government in Panama. Philippe Buanu-Varilla is going to help. This was a former chief engineer with the French. He's going to travel to Washington, D.C., where he is going to meet with President Roosevelt, October 9th of 1903. They meet, they discuss, he goes back. It just so happens that on November 2nd, a U.S. gunboat, the Nashville, is going to arrive in Panama. And I'm sure it's just coincidence that the next day, a revolution begins in Panama. And it just so happens that as the Colombian forces are coming there to stop this revolution, our Marines happen to be in the way, so they can't reach the rebels. The rebels declare Panama independent, and we recognize Panama's independence 2 days later. And one of our first orders of business is to begin talking about a canal in Panama. Which brings us to the Hay-Buanu-Varilla Treaty, where we will receive complete, unending control of a 10-mile wide canal zone. Roosevelt is quoted as saying, after pushed by reporters and getting him a little irate, he says, "I took the canal and let Congress debate," which in the end does cost us some money because we basically have to pay Panama for it because